Tucked away in the ancient book of Ezekiel, there's this incredibly dramatic prophecy that has just fascinated interpreters for centuries. It paints a picture of this massive future invasion of Israel, led by a really mysterious figure named Gog from a land called Magog. It's a foretelling of a truly cataclysmic war, and it sparked this endless debate about who these people are and when this is all supposed to go down. And so much of that debate really just boils down to one very specific question. A super popular interpretation points the finger directly at modern-day Russia as this northern superpower destined to lead the attack. But is that what the ancient text is actually saying? Well, let's dive in and find out. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the prophecy itself, then we'll look at the case for Russia. After that, we'll challenge that evidence, explore a totally different idea, a Middle Eastern coalition, and finally, we'll talk about why any of this matters in the first place. Okay, first up, the prophecy of Gog. So Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 describe this leader, Gog, who gathers this huge confederation of nations to come and attack a peaceful and unsuspecting Israel in what the text calls the latter days. Now, a really common way people frame this is through a view called premillennialism. This is a theological viewpoint that sees the war of Gog and Magog as a major end times event. A final, huge conflict that happens during a period of incredible turmoil right before the return of Christ. And that context is absolutely crucial because it shapes how every single detail of the prophecy gets interpreted. So that brings us to the most widespread interpretation, especially over the last century, the theory that Gog is a future leader of Russia. This has been a really powerful idea that's influenced biblical prophecy circles for decades. So what's the evidence? The entire case really rests on two key pillars. First, there's a word in the text, Rosh, that gets identified as an ancient name for Russia. And second, the prophet describes the invasion as coming from the remote parts of the north. And hey, if you look at a modern map from Israel, that points straight to Moscow. But what happens when we put those two pillars under a microscope? Well, when you take a closer look at the original Hebrew text, some pretty significant challenges to that traditional view start to pop up. Okay, let's look at that first pillar, the word Rosh. The traditional view says it's a place name, a proper noun. But in Hebrew, the word Rosh just means head or chief. So that phrase, Prince of Rosh, could easily, and a lot of scholars argue should, be translated as chief prince. It wouldn't be a territory, it would be a title. And think about this. If Rosh were a nation, you'd expect to see it mentioned elsewhere, right? Like Egypt or Babylon. But we don't. It's not there. Interpreting it as a place name right here and only here makes it kind of a one-off, which is linguistically inconsistent with the rest of the Old Testament. So what about that second pillar, the invasion from the remote parts of the north? Again, the traditional view takes this as a literal compass direction, but a deeper textual analysis suggests it might be more of a concept. It can mean a place of high military power, an exalted or threatening position, not necessarily a geographic location hundreds of miles away. The original Hebrew phrase is yarkete sapon, and we've got a perfect example of this conceptual idea somewhere else in the Bible. The prophet Jeremiah called the invading army of Babylonia a threat from the north. But wait a minute, Babylon is geographically to the east of Israel, so why say north? Because they were the dominant, the exalted, the big, scary military power of the day. So the crucial point is, north could mean powerful, not just polar. So if Rosh is a title and north is a concept of power, well, that changes the entire picture. Instead of looking for some distant invader like Russia, maybe the prophecy is pointing to a coalition of nations much, much closer to home for Israel. And when you look at the other nations Ezekiel actually lists in Gog's alliance, their ancient territories map almost perfectly onto the modern Middle East and North Africa. Magog and Meshech are associated with modern-day Turkey. Persia is, of course, Iran. Cush is connected to Sudan and Put to Libya. All of a sudden, this whole conflict looks very, very regional. And there's another layer of modern context here that the source material points out. From a geopolitical perspective, it's definitely worth noting that all of the territories identified in this alternate reading are, today, Islamic nations. So, all this begs a huge question. Why did the Russia theory get so popular in the first place? And what does all this teach us about how we read ancient texts today? Well, a few factors might explain the Russia theory's popularity. For one, the Bible's narrative is overwhelmingly focused on Israel and its immediate neighbors. Plus, you have to remember the Cold War. Viewing Russia as the great adversary might have made it a really easy and convenient fit for a prophetic villain. It just goes to show how our modern headlines and our cultural biases can act like a filter, shaping how we read prophecy without us even realizing it. Ultimately, this whole exploration points to a call for intellectual honesty and just plain diligence. It's about studying the text for what it actually says, not just for what we might expect it or want it to say. As the Apostle Paul wrote, the goal is to be a worker who does not need to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. This whole reevaluation of Gog and Magog isn't just about ancient history. It's a powerful case study in critical thinking, and it asks a very modern question. How might the news we consume and the cultural assumptions we hold today be shaping our understanding of the past?